40,000 years ago, a single mistake could erase an entire family before sunrise. There were no police to call, no locked doors, and no light switch to push back the dark. There was only fire, a handful of sharpened stones, and the people sleeping beside you. On one freezing morning, a young man woke to discover that the fire was dying. Then he found a human footprint outside the shelter. It did not belong to anyone in his group. Someone had stood in the darkness, watching them sleep. What happened next was not simply a fight for food or survival. It was a choice that would define what it meant to be human. Because our ancestors did not conquer the world by being the strongest creatures alive. They conquered it by deciding who was worth saving. This is the story of one day, one fire, and the strangers who stepped out of the dark. The first alarm clock in human history was fear. 40,000 years ago, long before cities, highways, paychecks, and glowing screens, a man named Kael opened his eyes because the fire had gone quiet. He did not know the hour. No one did. Hours had not been invented. But he knew something was wrong. The fire at the center of the shelter was still alive, yet barely. A few red coals pulsed beneath a layer of ash. Whoever had been watching it should have added wood before it reached this point. Kael remained still. Around him, 30 people slept close together on layers of dried grass and animal hide. Children were tucked between adults. An old woman rested near the warmest stones. 2 hunters lay with their spears within reach. A young mother slept with one arm across her baby's chest, feeling every breath without waking. No one had private space. No one wanted it. Distance meant cold. Distance meant silence. Distance meant that if something entered the shelter, you might face it alone. Kael listened. A child breathed through a blocked nose. Someone ground his teeth. The baby shifted beneath its mother's hand. From the far side of the shelter came the slow, uneven breathing of Boren, the oldest man in the group. But there was no sound from Toma. Toma had been assigned to watch the fire. Kael slowly pushed himself upright. His muscles resisted. Sleeping on the ground did not allow the body to forget the work of the previous day. His shoulders ached. His legs felt heavy. A shallow cut across his palm had stiffened during the night. He ignored all of it. Pain was information, not an excuse. He reached for the stone knife beside his bedding and looked toward the entrance. Toma was sitting there, his back against the rock wall, his face turned toward the darkness beyond the shelter. His eyes were open. "Toma," Kael whispered. The young man did not move. Kael rose and crossed the sleeping space carefully, placing each foot where he knew the ground was clear. One careless step could land on a hand, a tool, a sharpened flake of stone, or the leg of a sleeping child. When he reached Toma, he touched his shoulder. Toma flinched so hard that his elbow struck the wall. Several sleepers stirred. "What did you hear?" Kael asked. Toma swallowed. "Nothing." Kael looked at the dying fire. "You forgot the wood." "I did not forget." "Then why is it dying?" Toma stared beyond the entrance. "Because something was watching us." That answer brought Kael fully awake. He crouched beside Toma and followed his gaze. The land outside was still covered in darkness. The first light had not yet reached the horizon. Kael could make out the nearest rocks, the black shapes of low trees, and the narrow path leading away from the shelter. Nothing moved. "What was it?" he asked. "I do not know." "Where?" "Near the thorn trees. I heard one step, then another." "A deer?" "No." "A wolf?" Toma shook his head. "It stopped when I moved." Kael studied him. Toma was young, but he was not foolish. He had spent his entire life learning the difference between wind, prey and danger. He knew the soft movement of rabbits, the quick rhythm of hooves, and the almost weightless approach of a cat. What did it sound like? Like us? Kael felt his hand tighten around the stone knife. Another person. That could be worse than an animal. An animal might attack because it was hungry. A stranger could attack for food, tools, territory, revenge, or reasons no one understood until blood had already been spilled. Kael reached back and touched the shoulder of Sarah, who slept nearest the entrance. Her eyes opened immediately. No confusion, no question. She saw the knife in his hand and became alert. "Toma heard someone outside," Kael whispered. Sarah sat up and reached for her spear. Within moments, 3 adults were awake. No one shouted. No one lit a torch. Sudden noise might warn whoever was outside that the camp had noticed them. Kael placed 2 pieces of wood over the coals. He bent close and breathed steadily into the ash. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then a thin flame appeared. The fire caught. Light spread across the shelter, touching faces, tools, hides, and hands. People began to wake, not from panic, but from the subtle change around them. Humans had survived because they noticed small changes. A new sound, a missing sound, a different smell, a shift in the group's breathing. The old woman, Nara, opened her eyes and looked directly at Kael. "What is it?" "Maybe nothing." She pushed herself upright. Maybe nothing does not wake 3 people with weapons. By then, several children were awake. One boy tried to stand, but his mother pulled him back against her. "Stay close." The boy did not argue. Children learned early that there were moments for questions and moments for silence. Kael, Sarah, and another hunter named Oren moved toward the entrance. Behind them, Nara fed more wood into the fire. She did not need to be told. The stronger flame gave warmth, light, and the message that the group was awake and united. Kael stepped outside. Cold air struck his face. He lowered himself and examined the ground near the entrance. The earth there had been packed hard by generations of feet. Tracks overlapped tracks. Adults, children, dogs, deer, foxes. He looked farther out. Sarah pointed toward the thorn trees. There, in a patch of soft soil, was a mark that had not been there the day before. Kael approached it slowly. A footprint, human. Oren crouched beside it. "One person," he said. "Maybe," Sarah replied. She examined the broken grass beyond the print. Kael touched the edge of the track. The soil was still slightly loose. "Recent?" "How recent?" Toma asked from the shelter entrance. Kael looked toward the brightening sky. "During your watch." Toma's face tightened. He had not imagined it. That should have comforted him. It did not. Sarah moved several steps away and found another print. Then another. The stranger had approached the shelter, stopped near the thorn trees, and remained there long enough to shift his weight from one foot to the other. Watching. Then the tracks turned away. Oren followed them to the edge of the rocky ground, where they disappeared. "Do we wake everyone?" he asked. "They are already awake," Nara said behind them. The entire group had gathered near the entrance. No one had ordered them to rise. No leader had called a meeting. The concern had passed through the shelter, the way heat passed from one body to another. A woman counted the children. Another checked the tools. Someone handed Kael a spear without being asked. Buren, the oldest man, stepped forward slowly. Age had bent his back, but had not weakened his attention. He studied the footprint, then looked toward the northern ridge. "Not one of the river people," he said. "How do you know?" Toma asked. "The foot covering." Buren pointed at the outline. The stranger had wrapped something around the foot, leaving a broad edge in the soil. The river people tie theirs differently. Mountain people? Oren asked. Perhaps. Why come alone? Buren looked at him. Perhaps he was not alone. The children became quieter. Kael scanned every place where a person might hide. He saw no movement, but absence did not mean safety. The group did not panic. Panic wasted strength and made people stupid. Instead, they did what humans had done for thousands of generations. They shared what they knew. Toma described the steps. Sarah explained the direction of the tracks. Oren reported where they disappeared. Nara reminded them that smoke had been visible from the southern valley the previous evening. Buren recalled that another group had passed through the region many seasons earlier, hungry and unwilling to trade. Each person held only part of the truth. Together, they built a picture. The stranger had approached during the darkest part of the night. He had come close enough to see the fire. He had watched the sleeping shelter. He had left without entering. That could mean fear. It could mean curiosity. It could mean he had been counting them. Kael looked at the people around him. These were not co-workers, neighbors, or casual friends. They were the reason he was alive. Nara had kept him warm when his mother died. Buren had taught him how to recognize rain 2 days before it arrived. Sarah had carried his daughter through a flooded river. Oren had shared food with him during a winter when there was almost nothing to share. Even Toma, young and frightened, had remained awake while everyone else slept. This was what morning meant before clocks. You did not wake as an individual. You woke as part of a living wall of memory, warmth, skill, and trust. The eastern sky began to brighten. The danger had not revealed itself. No stranger appeared. No weapon flew from the trees. Slowly, the group began its ordinary morning tasks. The children were allowed to move again. They stretched, whispered, and pushed one another until an adult gave them a warning look. Someone checked the bindings on the spears. Someone inspected the sleeping area for insects. A mother carried her child outside. Nara knelt beside the fire and arranged the wood so it would burn evenly. Buren remained near the entrance, studying the empty land. Kael stood beside him. "Will he return?" Kael asked. Buren watched the light spread across the ground. "Everyone returns when they want something. What does he want?" The old man gave no answer. Behind them, the shelter filled with voices. Not loud voices, not frightened voices. The low, steady sound of people becoming a group again after the vulnerability of sleep. Kael tightened his grip on the spear and stared at the final footprint before sunlight erased its sharp edges. The day had begun, and somewhere beyond the ridge, someone now knew exactly where they slept. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, fear had become hunger. The footprint outside the shelter had not disappeared from anyone's mind, but bodies have their own demands. Children grew restless. Adults moved more slowly. Stomachs tightened. No one announced breakfast. There was no breakfast. There were no fixed meals, no table, no hour when everyone stopped and ate together. People ate when food was available, when work allowed it, or when hunger became too loud to ignore. Nara reached into a hide pouch and removed a handful of dried berries. She gave the first ones to the children. The youngest boy grabbed too many. His sister slapped his hand away. Nara caught the boy's wrist before he could strike back. "One hand," she told him. He opened his fingers. She placed 3 berries in his palm. "Enough to begin." The boy ate them slowly this time. Across the shelter, Oren cut a strip from the last piece of smoked deer meat. The meat was dark and tough. He divided it with a stone blade, not by size, but by need. A larger piece went to a nursing mother. Another went to Buren. A smaller strip went to Toma, who had spent the night awake. Kael watched him distribute it. The hunter who had killed the deer was not present. He had gone south with another band many days earlier. It did not matter. The meat did not belong to the hunter once it entered the camp. It belonged to the group. That was not generosity. It was survival. Today, one person had meat. Tomorrow, someone else might find roots, eggs, shellfish, or honey. A person who shared during abundance would be remembered during scarcity. A person who hoarded food would be remembered too. Nothing was written down. Nothing needed to be. Everyone carried the record. Nara placed several pale roots beside the coals. They had been cooking slowly through the night. Their outer skin was blackened, but inside they had softened. She picked one up with a folded piece of hide and handed it to Kael. Eat. He peeled back the burned layer with his thumb. Steam escaped. The root was bland, slightly sweet, and dense enough to settle the emptiness in his stomach. Toma watched him. "What is it?" he asked. Kael looked at Nara. She gave Toma a long stare. "You have eaten it since you had teeth. I know what it is. I mean, why is this one sweeter?" Nara broke another root in half. "Because it stayed near the coals longer. Would it be sweeter if we put it in the flame? It would become ash." Toma smiled. Nara did not. "Remember that." He nodded. That was how teaching happened. No school. No lesson prepared in advance. A question appeared, and knowledge moved from one mind to another. Near the entrance, Sarah cracked hazelnuts between two stones. She used just enough pressure to break the shells without crushing the meat inside. Her daughter sat beside her, trying to copy the movement. The first nut shattered. The second flew from between the stones. The third cracked cleanly. The girl looked up with pride. Sarah handed the nut back to her. "Again." The girl frowned. "I did it." "You did it once." The girl placed another nut on the stone. Kael ate in silence and watched the shelter come alive. One person sorted dried leaves. Another checked a basket of seeds for mold. A young man scraped the burned layer from several roots and passed the soft centers to the children. Buren chewed a piece of meat slowly, using only one side of his mouth. He had lost 2 teeth during the previous winter, but no one treated him as useless. He knew where water remained when the streams dried. He remembered which plants eased fever. He could look at a cloud bank and tell the group whether they had 1 day or 3 before rain. A body weakened. Knowledge did not. Kael looked again toward the ridge. The stranger had not returned. Still, the group did not relax completely. Spears remained near their hands. The children stayed closer than usual. No one wandered beyond the shelter without telling someone. Sarah sat beside Kael and handed him 3 nuts. "You are watching the ridge instead of eating." "I am doing both." "You are bad at both." He glanced at her. She smiled, but her eyes remained serious. "Do you think it was a scout?" she asked. "Maybe." "One person looking for food?" "Maybe." "One person looking for us?" Kael did not answer. Sarah cracked another nut. If he was hungry, he could have called out. If he was afraid, he would not. If he was dangerous, he may return. Kael looked at the people around the fire. "Yes." Sarah placed a nut in her mouth. "Then we should not leave the camp empty." That was the first practical decision of the day. Usually, most adults would separate after eating. Some would gather plants. Some would check traps. Some would search for animal tracks. Others would remain behind to repair tools or care for children. Today, the footprint changed the balance. The group needed food. The group also needed protection. Buren listened as people discussed the options. No one commanded. No one stood above the others and declared what would happen. The decision formed gradually through experience, urgency, and trust. Sarah would lead a gathering group toward the creek. Oren and Kael would remain near camp until the sun climbed higher. 2 others would circle the ridge and look for signs of movement. Nara would stay with the children and continue preparing food. Toma volunteered to join the trackers. Kael shook his head. You did not sleep. I can walk. You can also miss what matters. Toma's jaw tightened. I heard him last night. That is why you should rest now. I do not need rest. Buren spoke from beside the fire. Only children and fools say that. A few people laughed. The tension broke. Toma looked embarrassed, but he stopped arguing. Rest was not weakness. In their world, a tired person could mistake one plant for another, miss a broken branch, step into a hole, or fail to hear an animal before it attacked. A careless mistake could injure one person. An injury could burden everyone. The group finished what food remained. There was not much. Enough roots for most adults. A little smoked meat. Several handfuls of nuts and berries. No one left completely full, but no one expected to. Hunger was not always an emergency. It was a signal. It told them to move, remember, search, and share. Nara packed dried berries into small hide pouches. She added roasted roots to another. The gathering group would carry food with them because they might walk for most of the day. Sarah checked the baskets. One had a weak section near the bottom. She gave it to her daughter. Repair this. The girl examined the broken weave. With what? Sarah pointed to a bundle of fibers. The girl sighed. I want to go. You will. When? When the basket can carry food without losing it. The girl began working. Another lesson. Food was never just what entered the mouth. Food was knowledge. It was knowing where to find it, when to take it, how much to leave behind, how to remove poison, how to keep it from spoiling, how to carry it, and how to divide it without tearing the group apart. Kael watched Nara hand the final piece of meat to a small boy who had already eaten. The boy looked surprised. Why me? Because you are still growing. Buren raised an eyebrow. So am I. Nara did not look at him. You are growing backward. This time, everyone laughed, even Kael. For a moment, the footprint on the ridge felt farther away. Then, one of the trackers returned. He was breathing hard. The laughter stopped. There are more tracks, he said. Kael stood. How many? 4, maybe 5. Near the ridge? The tracker shook his head. Closer. No one moved. He pointed toward the lower trees beyond the shelter. They circled us before dawn. Nara reached for a spear. The children were pulled inward. The food remained where it was, half-eaten, forgotten. And for the first time that morning, hunger was no longer the strongest feeling in the camp. The first spear left the shelter before the first hunter did. It struck the earth beside the lower trees and stood trembling in the ground. A warning. Whoever had circled the camp now knew they had been seen. Kael stepped forward with another spear in his hand. Oren moved beside him. Sarah remained near the entrance, positioned between the trees and the children. No one called into the distance. A voice could reveal fear. Silence forced the hidden strangers to wonder what the group knew. The tracker crouched and pointed to a series of compressed grasses. 5 people, he said. One was heavy. One walked with a damaged foot. Weapons? Kael asked. I found the end of a spear pressed into the soil. Oren looked toward the ridge. They came prepared. So are we, Sarah said. Behind her, the adults formed a quiet line. Even those who rarely hunted held sharpened sticks, stone knives, or heavy pieces of wood. The oldest children gathered the younger ones near the fire. The camp had become a single body. Kael understood what the strangers would see if they returned. Not isolated families, not frightened individuals. A wall. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then a bird burst from the trees. Every spear rose. A figure stepped into view. He was thin, wrapped in an animal hide darkened by travel. His hair was bound away from his face. He carried a spear, but he held it sideways across his body instead of pointing it toward the camp. Another figure appeared behind him, then a third. Kael counted 5 in total. The last man leaned heavily on a wooden staff. His left foot was wrapped in layers of hide. Dark stains marked the binding. The strangers stopped beyond throwing distance. Their leader placed his spear on the ground. Kael did not lower his. The man raised both hands. "We do not want your fire," he said. His words sounded unfamiliar in rhythm, but the meaning was clear. Their groups shared enough language to understand one another. "What do you want?" Kael asked. The stranger looked toward the fire, then toward the food scattered near it. "Meat." A child made a small sound behind Sarah. The stranger heard it. His expression changed. Not calculation. Shame. Kael looked at the other 4. Their faces were narrow. Their clothing hung loosely around their bodies. One young woman kept her arm pressed against her stomach. They were starving. Or they wanted the camp to believe they were. "You circled us in the dark," Oren said. "We did not know how many you were. You could have spoken. We did not know if you would answer with words." Kael watched the injured man struggle to remain standing. "How long since you ate?" he asked. The leader hesitated. 2 days. Nara spoke from the shelter entrance. "That is not true." The stranger looked at her. "You have eaten little for much longer," she said. 2 days is only when the last food ended." The man lowered his hand slightly. "Yes." Kael glanced toward Buren. The old man gave no sign of what he thought. Sharing food with strangers could save lives. It could also invite danger into the center of the camp. "How many are in your group?" Kael asked. "These are all who remain." "What happened?" "The herds turned east. We followed too late. Then my brother broke his foot." The injured man looked down. "We found tracks yesterday," the leader continued. "Antelope moving north." Oren's attention sharpened. "How many?" 6, maybe 7. "Fresh?" "This morning." Sarah looked at Kael. The camp needed food. The strangers needed food. A small herd nearby could solve both problems, or kill more people. Kael understood the choice before anyone said it aloud. They could give away what little remained and be hungry by nightfall. They could send the strangers away and hope desperation did not turn them violent. Or they could hunt together. Hunting with people they did not know meant trusting unfamiliar hands at the exact moment a mistake could drive a spear into the wrong body. But hunting was never about certainty. It was about choosing which risk offered life. Buren stepped forward. "Show us the tracks." The stranger looked at him. "If the herd is where you say, we hunt together," Buren said. "The meat is divided between both groups." Oren frowned. "They are 5. We are more." They found the herd. "We have the stronger hunters. They have empty stomachs. That does not make them equal." Buren turned toward him. "No, it makes them dangerous. Feed a desperate person, and he may become an ally. Refuse him, and he remains desperate." Oren said nothing. The stranger picked up his spear. "My name is Dagan." Kael finally lowered his weapon. "I am Kael." The hunt began before trust did. 8 hunters left the camp. Kael, Oren, Sarah, and 2 others from the shelter joined Dagan and 2 of his companions. The injured man stayed behind with the remaining stranger. No one liked leaving outsiders near the children, but Nara accepted the risk. She placed the injured man near the fire where everyone could see him. Before Kael departed, she caught his arm. "Do not watch only the animals." He understood. "Watch the men." The hunters crossed the ridge in a loose line. Dagan led them toward a shallow valley. He moved efficiently, despite his hunger, checking the ground without slowing. His companion, a woman named Ira, carried a short spear with a stone point shaped differently from Kael's weapons. The base was wider, the edges thinner. Oren noticed it. "Who made that?" "My mother," Ira said. "It will break." "It has not." Oren gave her a skeptical look. Era ignored him. They found the first antelope track near a dry stream bed. Kael knelt beside it. The print was sharp. Small grains of soil still clung to the edge. "Recent," he said. Dagan pointed toward the northern slope. "They went that way." Oren examined the broken plants. One animal separated from the others. "Injured?" Sarah asked. "Old," Dagan replied. "Its right rear leg drags slightly." Kael studied the pattern. Dagan was correct. That changed the hunt. They would not attack the herd. They would pressure the weakest animal until it separated completely. No one rushed. Speed was useful for the final moments. Before that, patience mattered more. They followed the tracks uphill, stopping whenever the ground became difficult to read. On stone, they looked for displaced dust. In grass, they searched for bent stems. Near bushes, they checked for fresh leaves torn at the height of an antelope's mouth. Every mark carried a sentence. Together, the hunters read the story. The herd had slowed near the stream bed. It had fed on low shrubs. One animal had rested. Then something had frightened them. Dagan pointed to a second set of tracks. Wolf. Several wolves. The herd was already under pressure. "That helps us," Oren said. "Or it means the wolves reach the old one first," Ira replied. They increased their pace. By midday, the sun pressed hard against their backs. Sweat ran into Kael's eyes. His stomach felt hollow, but the hunger sharpened him. At the top of the next rise, Sarah raised a fist. Everyone stopped. Below them, the antelope moved across open ground. 7 animals. 1 lagged behind. The old animal's rear leg bent awkwardly with every third step. Dagan smiled for the first time. Oren studied the valley. "We drive them toward the rocks." "No," Dagan said. "They will scatter before the narrow ground. The rocks will slow them. They will slow us, too." Oren's face tightened. Kael stepped between them. "We use both." He pointed toward a line of low brush. 3 hunters move east and show themselves. The herd turns west. The rest of us stay hidden near the rocks. When the old animal falls behind, we close the space. Ira looked at the terrain. "If the herd turns north?" "Sarah blocks the slope." Sarah nodded. Dagan considered the plan. Then he extended his hand. Kael gripped his forearm. The first agreement between their groups was made without ceremony. The hunters separated. Kael moved through the brush with Dagan and Ira. They stayed low until the wind shifted against their faces. Then Oren rose in the distance. The antelope saw him immediately. The herd ran west. For a few seconds, the old animal kept pace. Then its damaged leg failed. The gap widened. Kael exploded from the brush. Dagan and Era ran beside him. The old antelope changed direction, but Sarah appeared on the slope. It turned again and found Oren closing from the opposite side. The hunters did not chase blindly. They shaped the animal's choices. Every body became a moving wall. The antelope ran toward the rocks, exactly where Kael wanted it. Then a wolf leaped from behind a boulder. The animal panicked. The plan shattered. The herd vanished north. The old antelope stumbled downhill. 3 more wolves appeared and raced toward it. "Move!" Kael shouted. Now there was no patience, no careful formation. Hunters and wolves charged toward the same dying animal. One wolf reached it first and bit into its rear leg. The antelope kicked, striking the wolf in the chest. Another wolf lunged for the throat. Ira threw her spear. The stone point struck the ground inches from the wolf's body. The wolves scattered, but only for a moment. Kael reached the antelope and drove his spear behind its shoulder. Dagan struck next. The animal collapsed between them. A wolf rushed from the side. Oren stepped in front of Kael and thrust his spear into its path. The wolf twisted away, teeth snapping close enough for Kael to hear them strike together. The hunters formed a circle around the kill. 5 wolves watched from the rocks. Their bodies were lean. Their eyes did not leave the meat. Dagan stood beside Kael, breathing hard. "Now we discover whether your people share," he said. Kael kept his spear pointed toward the wolves. "No," he answered. "Now we discover whether yours do." Behind them lay enough meat to feed both camps. Around them waited animals that had followed hunger longer than any human agreement. And before anyone could divide the kill, they first had to survive long enough to carry it home. The wolves did not attack. They waited. That was worse. Kael stood over the fallen antelope with his spear pointed toward the nearest animal. The wolf's body remained low, its shoulders tight, its eyes fixed on the blood spreading beneath the carcass. Behind it, 4 more moved across the rocks. They were not afraid of humans. They were calculating. So were the humans. "Fire," Sarah said. "We have none," Oren answered. Era pulled a small leather pouch from beneath her clothing. "I do." Inside were dry fibers, powdered bark, and a dark piece of fungus that could carry a spark for hours. Dagan looked at her. "You carried an ember?" "I carried the possibility of one." She knelt behind the circle of hunters and began working. Kael did not turn to watch. He could hear the quick scraping of stone against stone. Once, twice, again. The nearest wolf took a step forward. Oren slammed the base of his spear against the ground. The animal stopped. "Come closer," Oren said. "I need another hide." The wolf did not understand the words. It understood the tone. A sharp crack sounded behind Kael. Then another. Era blew gently. A thin line of smoke rose between her hands. "Give me dry grass." Dagan tore a fistful from beneath a rock where the ground had stayed protected from moisture. Ira wrapped it around the glowing fungus and breathed into it. The bundle flared. The wolves moved back. Human beings were not the strongest animals in the valley. They were not the fastest. They did not have claws, thick fur, or jaws that could crush bone. But they carried sunrise in their hands. Sarah broke branches from a dead shrub. Era fed them into the small flame. Within moments, they had enough fire to make the wolves reconsider the price of the meat. Kael lifted a burning branch. The nearest wolf exposed its teeth. Kael stepped toward it. The animal retreated. Not far. Just enough. "They will follow us," Sarah said. "Then they can watch us eat," Oren replied. The hunters worked quickly. Dagan opened the antelope with a stone blade. Kael expected rough cuts from a starving man, but Dagan's hand moved with precision. He cut around the hide without damaging it, separated the organs, and freed the largest sections of meat. Ira removed her spear from the ground and examined the stone point. A piece had broken from one edge. Oren saw it. "I told you." "It missed the wolf," she said. "The ground broke it." "A strong point survives the ground. A smart hunter aims better." Sarah laughed. Even Oren almost smiled. The work continued. They divided the animal into loads that could be carried. The liver and heart would spoil first, so they cooked pieces over the fire and shared them there. No ceremony marked the first bite. No one pretended hunger was noble. They ate quickly. Warm blood remained on their hands. Kael watched Dagon cut a portion of liver and carry it to Ira before taking any for himself. Dagon noticed him watching. "She made the fire." Kael nodded. That told him more about the strangers than any promise could have. After eating, they wrapped meat in the hide. Spears became carrying poles. Sinew tied the loads in place. Kael lifted one end of the heaviest bundle. Dagon took the other. For the first time, their survival had the same weight. The wolves followed at a distance. Whenever they came too close, Sarah raised the burning branch. The flame weakened as they walked, but its meaning remained strong. By late afternoon, the hunters reached the ridge above camp. Children saw them first. A shout rose from below. Adults emerged from the shelter. Some carried weapons, uncertain whether the returning figures were friends or enemies. Then they saw the meat. The entire camp changed. People ran forward. The youngest children jumped and shouted. Older ones reached for the loads until Nara ordered them to keep their hands clear. The injured stranger stood with support from Buren. His face changed when he saw Dagon. Relief weakened him more than pain had. Dagon placed his forehead against his brother's. Neither man spoke. The meat was carried to the central fire. No one asked which group owned it. There was only work. Some people cut strips for drying. Others prepared the organs. Children gathered wood. Nara inspected the hide and decided which sections could be used for clothing, bindings, and bedding. The antelope became smaller with every skilled hand that touched it. Nothing remained simply what it had been. Meat became food. Hide became warmth. Bone became needles, points, handles, and ornaments. Sinew became thread. Fat became fuel and preservation. Even the broken pieces would have a purpose. Kael sat near the fire and opened his hand. The shallow cut across his palm had split during the hunt. Dirt and blood filled it. Nara saw the wound. "Clean it. It is small. So is the opening where death enters." She poured warm water over his hand and pressed crushed leaves against the cut. Kael hissed. Nara wrapped it with a strip of soft hide. "You cannot hold a spear like this tomorrow." "I can." "You should learn from Toma." Kael looked toward the young man who was sleeping near the wall. He said the same thing about rest. And he was wrong, too. Nearby, Ira sat with the broken spear point in her lap. Sarah's daughter watched her. "Can you fix it?" the girl asked. "No." "Then it is useless." Ira shook her head. "Nothing sharp is useless." She placed the broken point against a flat stone and began striking the edges with a smaller tool. Tiny flakes fell away. Slowly, the ruined spear point became a cutting blade. The girl moved closer. "How did you know it could become that?" "My mother showed me." "How did she know?" "Her father showed her." "And who showed him?" Ira paused. "Someone whose name we forgot." The girl looked troubled by that answer. Ira handed her the new blade. The name was lost. The knowledge was not. Across the camp, the same kind of memory lived inside every task. Oren repaired a spear shaft damaged during the confrontation with the wolves. He heated the wood over the fire, bent it carefully, then rolled it against a flat stone to test its straightness. Dagon's injured brother scraped fat from the hide while seated. His foot prevented him from walking, but his hands still contributed. Buren showed one of the older boys how to split a long bone without destroying the marrow inside. Sarah twisted plant fibers into cord. Nara used a stone scraper to clean the hide. No one called these activities art. No one called them engineering. No one separated knowledge from survival. Their hands remembered what their minds had inherited. Kael watched the two groups work together. That morning, they had faced each other with weapons. Now, Dagan held one end of the hide, while Nara scraped the other. Era corrected Sarah's daughter's grip on the stone blade. Oren examined the stranger's spear point more closely than he wanted anyone to notice. The children had already stopped thinking of the visitors as enemies. Children accepted a changed world faster than adults. As the sun lowered, the urgent work ended. Strips of meat hung above smoke. Bones rested beside the fire. The hide had been cleaned enough to wait until morning. The tools were placed within reach. For the first time since the footprint appeared, no one was searching the ridge. The danger had not vanished. Other strangers might still be out there. The wolves remained somewhere beyond the firelight. Tomorrow could bring hunger again. But for a few hours, the group had enough. That changed what human beings became. When the body no longer demanded immediate action, the mind moved elsewhere. A boy picked up 2 small pieces of antler and struck them together in a steady rhythm. A younger child copied him with stones. Someone began tapping a hand against a hollow log. The sounds did not make food. They did not repair tools. They did not defend the camp. Still, no one told them to stop. Era took a thin bone from her pouch. Small holes had been carved along its length. She raised it to her lips. A clear note passed through the shelter. Every child became still. Then came a second note. A third. The melody was simple, but it carried something no spear could carry. Tension loosened. Shoulders dropped. People who had spent the day watching one another with suspicion now listened to the same breath moving through bone. Dagan began clapping. Sarah joined him. The children rose first. They moved without rules, turning, jumping, laughing, following the beat. The adults watched until watching became harder than joining. Even Oren tapped his foot against the earth. Kael sat near the fire with his injured hand resting on his knee. He looked at the newly sharpened blades, the repaired spears, the hanging meat, and the people moving together. This was how humans defeated the dark, not only with weapons, not only with fire. They took stone, bone, wood, memory, and fear, and turned them into things that had never existed before. A blade, a garment, a song, a reason for strangers to remain beside the same fire. The most dangerous weapon in the camp was not a spear, it was memory. By nightfall, everyone knew how Dagan's people had approached the shelter, how Toma had heard them in the dark, how the two groups had nearly become enemies, and how they had returned carrying meat together. No one had written the story down. Still, it would not be lost. The first version began beside the fire, while strips of antelope smoked above the coals. A child told it badly. "There were 20 wolves," he said. "There were 5, Sarah corrected. "They were as large as bears." "They were hungry dogs with better teeth," Oren said. "I saw one jump over Kael." "You were not there." The child ignored him. Kael fought it with one hand. Kael lifted his bandaged palm. "That part is true." The adults laughed. Dagan sat among them now, no longer at the edge of the shelter. His brother rested nearby with his injured foot, elevated on folded hides. Ira had placed her bone flute beside the fire, where every child could see it, but none dared touch it without permission. The story passed from one voice to another. Each person added something. Sarah explained how the hunters had surrounded the antelope. Oren described the wolves waiting on the rocks. Era reminded everyone that the fire had driven them back. Doggin spoke about the moment the strangers had first seen the shelter and wondered whether the people inside would offer food or death. That part quieted the group. Nara looked toward the children. "Listen carefully," she said. "Hunger can make a person look like an enemy." Oren leaned forward. "And an enemy can pretend to be hungry." Nara nodded. "Both are true." That was how the group taught, not with rules carved into stone, not with commands that could never change. They carried truth inside stories because stories could hold two dangers at once. Be generous. Be careful. Trust others. Watch them closely. A child might forget a warning spoken once in daylight, but a story involving wolves, blood, strangers, and fire could remain in the mind for a lifetime. Buren waited until everyone had finished speaking. Then he began again. He did not tell the story exactly as it had happened. He started with Toma alone in the dark. He described the dying fire and the sound beyond the trees. He described Kael finding the footprint. He described the strangers standing outside the camp with their spears lowered. Buren's voice was slow. He knew where to pause. He knew which details mattered and which ones weakened the story. When he reached the hunt, the children leaned closer. When he reached the wolves, no one interrupted. When he described both groups lifting the same weight of meat, even Oren became still. Buren ended before the return to camp. He stopped with Kael and Doggin carrying the antelope together while the wolves followed behind them. "What happened next?" one of the children asked. "You know what happened. Tell it." "Tomorrow." The children protested. Buren smiled. A story that ended completely was easy to forget. An unfinished story followed a person into sleep. Kael watched the old man. Buren could no longer run with hunters. He could not carry heavy loads or see distant tracks clearly. Yet when he spoke, the entire camp changed its breathing. His body had weakened. His influence had not. The stories belonged to everyone, but some people knew how to carry them farther. After Buren finished, conversation returned in smaller circles. The adults discussed where Doggin's group would sleep. This was not a minor question. Sleeping places revealed trust. A person near the center received warmth and protection. A person near the entrance faced danger first. Someone placed too far from everyone else was being watched. Someone placed beside children was being accepted. Oren wanted the strangers near the outer wall. They entered our land without speaking. "They had nowhere else to go," Sarah replied. "They watched us sleep. They left without attacking. They were counting us. Perhaps they were deciding whether we would kill them." Kael listened. Doggin did not defend himself. That mattered. A person who demanded trust rarely deserved it. Nara spoke from beside the injured man. "He stays near the fire. His foot must remain warm." No one challenged her. "The woman stays with him," Nara continued. "Doggin and the other man sleep near the entrance." Doggin nodded. It was a compromise. The injured were protected. The able-bodied strangers remained where everyone could see them. No chief declared the decision. No vote was counted. The answer formed through argument, experience, and the authority people had earned over years. Oren's courage gave him influence in matters of danger. Nara's knowledge gave her authority over injuries and care. Buren's memory mattered when choices resembled old problems. Sarah was trusted because she spoke carefully and rarely wasted words. Kael was followed because he acted without demanding obedience. Leadership moved from person to person depending on the need. That made the group difficult to control. It also made it difficult to destroy. A sudden cry interrupted the conversation. Sarah's daughter stood over the youngest boy. He had taken the repaired basket and torn the weakened section open again. "I told him not to touch it," she said. The boy held a loose fiber in his hand. "I wanted to see how it worked." "You broke it." "I can fix it." "You do not know how." The girl pushed him. He fell backward and began to cry. His mother moved forward, but Burin raised one hand. "Wait!" The girl looked around and realized everyone had seen her. Her anger changed into embarrassment. The boy's crying became louder because he now had an audience. Nara called them both closer. "Who damaged the basket first?" she asked. "It was already weak," the boy said. "Who tore it?" He lowered his eyes. "I did." "Who pushed him?" The girl crossed her arms. "He deserved it." "That was not my question." She hesitated. "I did." Nara placed the damaged basket between them. "One person repairs the weave. One gathers the fibers. You will decide who does which." The girl frowned. "That is not fair. Fair would be making Sarah repair it while both of you play." The children looked at each other. The boy chose to collect fibers. The girl agreed to repair the weave. No one was struck. No one was removed from the group. The harm created an obligation, and the obligation restored the relationship. In a camp this small, punishment could not be designed only to cause pain. People still had to live together afterward. Later, when the children were working, Oren leaned toward Kael. "She will remember being embarrassed. She will also remember how to repair a basket. She may resent Nara. She may." Oren watched the girl pull fiber through the broken weave. "Then, what stops her from doing it again?" Kael nodded toward the other children, who were whispering and laughing about the argument. "That." By morning, every child would know who had torn the basket, who had pushed whom, and who had complained that repairing their own damage was unfair. Reputation began early. It followed everyone. A generous person was remembered. A coward was remembered. A person who lied, stole food, abandoned a task, or endangered others could not hide behind distance or anonymity. There was nowhere to disappear. The same closeness that protected people also exposed them. As the fire settled, Dagan removed a necklace from beneath his clothing. Several small shells were threaded onto twisted cord. The nearest coast was many days away. Sarah touched one carefully. "You traveled there?" "My mother did." "She gave these to you?" "She received them from another group before I was born." Dagan removed one shell from the cord and held it toward Nara. "For your food." Nara did not take it. "You helped bring the meat." "For my brother." "He would not have been left outside." "You did not know him." "I knew he was injured." Dagan kept his hand extended. Nara finally accepted the shell. The exchange was not payment. It was memory made physical. Years later, someone might ask where the shell came from. Nara would tell them about the starving strangers, the antelope, the wolves, and the night when two groups shared one fire. Objects traveled. Stories traveled with them. Era opened another pouch and removed a piece of red stone. Ochre. She ground it against a flat surface until fine powder collected beneath her hand. Then she mixed it with animal fat. The children gathered around. "What is it for?" one asked. Ira touched the red mixture and drew a line across her own cheek. "For remembering who returned." She marked Dagon next, then his injured brother. After a pause, she turned toward Kael. He allowed her to draw a line across his forehead. Sarah stepped forward, then Oren. Soon, hunters from both groups wore the same red mark. No one explained whether it represented blood, fire, danger, gratitude, or belonging. Perhaps it meant all of them. The mark did not feed anyone. It did not sharpen a spear. Yet it changed the way the people looked at one another. By the time Era lifted the flute again, the strangers no longer appeared entirely strange. The first notes were low. Hands began striking the ground in rhythm. Children moved around the fire. Adults joined one by one. The injured man remained seated, but he struck his palm against his leg to keep the beat. The red lines moved across faces. The shell necklace caught the firelight. Voices rose together. No one asked whether the song belonged to Kael's people or Dagon's. By the end, it belonged to everyone who had survived the day. Outside the shelter, darkness covered the ridge where the strangers had once watched them. Inside, the group created something stronger than an agreement. They created a shared memory. And before the night was over, that memory would become a story. The story would become a warning. The warning would become tradition. And tradition would tell people who they were long after every person beside that fire was gone. Before dawn, one of the strangers disappeared. Kael knew it before anyone spoke. The sleeping place near the entrance was empty. The hide had been pushed aside. A spear was missing. Dagon was still there. So was Ira. The injured man slept beside the fire, his wounded foot wrapped and elevated. The fourth stranger remained against the outer wall. Only one had gone. Oren was already standing. I knew it. His voice woke the nearest adults. Sarah sat up and reached for her weapon. Who left? Dagon looked toward the empty place. Rovan. Where did he go? Oren demanded. I do not know. You expect us to believe that? Dagon rose slowly. If I knew, I would tell you. Oren lifted his spear. Kael stepped between them. Lower it. He brought armed strangers to our shelter. He also hunted beside us. And now one of them has vanished before sunrise. The camp was waking quickly. Children were pulled close. Adults checked the entrance, the fire, and the tools. Every person understood the danger without explanation. Rovan might have fled. He might have gone to find food. He might also have returned to others waiting beyond the ridge. Buren examined the empty bedding. He did not leave in panic. How can you know? Oren asked. He folded the hide away from the coals. A frightened man would not care where it fell. Nara checked the injured stranger. He did not take food. Sarah looked toward the entrance. He took his spear. A person walking alone would, Dagon said. Oren turned on him. A person bringing attackers would too. Kael crouched near the ground and studied the marks. Rovan had stepped carefully between the sleepers. He had moved toward the entrance, paused, and then continued outside. No one had heard him. That troubled Kael more than the missing spear. Toma appeared beside him. I should have been watching. You were asleep. I should have heard. You cannot hear every danger. Toma stared at the empty place. Then what is the point of watching? Kael looked at him. To hear enough. Outside, the sky had begun to lighten. Kael, Sarah, Oren, and Dagon followed Rovan's tracks. They crossed the lower trees and turned east, away from the route to Dagon's former camp. He is not returning to our old shelter, Dagon said. Where does this path lead? Sarah asked. Kael answered. To the river. Oren tightened his grip on the spear. Water, tracks, a place to meet another group. They moved faster. The footprints remained clear in the damp ground. Rovan had not tried to hide them. He had walked directly toward the river. When they reached the bank, they found him kneeling in the mud. He was not alone. A child stood beside him. She was perhaps 8 years old, thin enough that the bones in her shoulders showed beneath her hide covering. Her hair was tangled. Dried blood marked one side of her face. Rovan held a hand against her back as she drank from the river. Kael stopped. Oren did not lower his weapon. "Who is she?" Rovan turned. His eyes were red from exhaustion. "My daughter." Doggin stared at him. "You said she was dead." "I thought she was." The child looked toward the hunters. She tried to stand, but her legs failed. Rovan caught her. He had left before dawn because he had heard a sound from the river, a call used by his former group when someone became separated. He had followed it alone. The girl had survived for 3 days after the group scattered. She had hidden beneath fallen branches while wolves moved through the valley. She had eaten insects and chewed wet leaves. During the night, she had followed smoke from Kael's camp but lacked the strength to reach it. Rovan lifted her. "She needs food." Oren finally lowered his spear. No one apologized. There was no time. They returned to camp with the child wrapped against Rovan's chest. Nara took control the moment she saw them. "Do not give her meat." Rovan looked confused. "She is starving." "That is why." Nara mixed warm water with crushed roots and a small amount of rendered fat. She fed the girl slowly, one mouthful at a time. The child tried to seize the bowl. Nara pulled it away. "You will have more." The girl began to cry. Rovan held her wrists. "Please." Nara met his eyes. "If she eats too quickly, her body may reject it. Trust me." Rovan released his daughter. He had trusted no one enough to reveal that he was still searching for her. Now her life depended on the knowledge of a woman he had met the previous day. For several hours, the entire camp moved around the child. The younger children watched from a distance. Era cleaned the blood from the girl's face. Sira repaired the torn hide covering. Buran asked quiet questions about where she had hidden and what she had seen. Every answer mattered. The girl had noticed smoke beyond the western hills. More people. Perhaps another camp. Perhaps those who had driven Doggin's group from their path. The danger remained. But something inside the shelter had changed. The strangers were no longer people who had arrived hungry. They now had names, injuries, family, and grief. They had become difficult to abandon. By midday, the girl could sit without support. Rovan gave Nara the only object he carried besides his spear, a carved bone figure no longer than a finger. It had the shape of a bird. "My daughter's mother made it," he said. Nara tried to return it. Rovan closed her hand around the carving. "She would want the person who saved our child to have it." Nara looked at the small bird. Then she tied it to a cord and placed it around the girl's neck. "Her mother made it for her." Rovan bowed his head. No one spoke for a long time. That afternoon, the two groups faced a decision. Doggin's people could leave once the injured man and the child recovered. They could continue following the herds. They could search for surviving relatives. Or they could remain. More people meant more mouths. It also meant more hunters, more gatherers, more hands to carry children, more eyes to watch the darkness, more minds holding knowledge. The decision did not belong to one person. Everyone spoke. Oren warned that trust formed too quickly could destroy a group. Sarah said refusing every stranger would eventually leave them alone. Nara pointed toward the injured and the child. "They cannot travel yet." Buran reminded them that winter would arrive before the next full moon cycle had passed many times. Doggin offered knowledge of the eastern valleys. Ira offered her skill with fire, stone, and music. Rovan offered nothing. He simply sat beside his daughter and waited to learn whether she would be safe. Kael looked around the shelter. The group had never remained unchanged. Children were born. People died. Hunters joined partners in other bands. Strangers became relatives. Relatives sometimes became enemies. The circle survived because it could open without breaking. They stay until the child can walk and the injured foot can carry weight, Kael said. Orin looked at him. And after that? Kael turned toward Dagon. After that, they decide whether they still call themselves strangers. No one celebrated. Important decisions rarely felt like victory. They felt like responsibility. Night returned. The fire was built higher than usual. More bodies now shared its warmth. Sleeping places shifted to make room. Rovan lay beside his daughter. Ira slept near Nara. Dagon remained close to the entrance by choice. Orin placed his spear beside him, then handed Dagon a second weapon. For the first watch, Orin said. Dagon accepted it. They sat together, facing the darkness. Not friends. Not yet. But no longer enemies. Inside the shelter, the child with the carved bird finally slept. Toma fed another piece of wood into the flames before anyone asked him. Buran closed his eyes. Sarah pulled a hide over 2 children who had fallen asleep in the wrong place. Kael listened to the breathing around him. More voices, more memories, more risk, more strength. Beyond the firelight, wolves called from the ridge. No one moved. The sound belonged to the night, and the night no longer belonged only to fear. The group had food, weapons, fire, and knowledge. But none of those things explained why they had survived. They survived because one person stayed awake, because another shared meat, because hands repaired what had broken, because stories preserved what mattered, because strangers carried the same weight, because a starving child was treated as someone worth saving. 40,000 years before nations, laws, or written promises, human beings made the choice that would carry them across every frozen valley, burning plain, and unknown continent. They chose to keep one another alive. Outside, the darkness remained endless. Inside, the circle grew. 40,000 years later, the fire still burns. It no longer sits at the center of a stone shelter. It glows through kitchen windows, city streets, hospital rooms, classrooms, and the small screens we hold in our hands. We have crossed oceans, built nations, mapped the human genome, and placed machines beyond the edge of our world. But evolution did not erase the people we once were. Beneath every modern invention, the same ancient needs remain. We still search for safety. We still gather around shared meals. We still tell stories to make sense of fear. We still need someone to notice when our fire is fading. Our ancestors survived not because they were fearless, but because they refused to face fear alone. They shared food when hunger could have made them selfish. They protected children who could not protect themselves. They preserved the wisdom of the old. And when strangers stepped out of the darkness, they learned that survival did not always mean closing the circle. Sometimes it meant making the circle larger. That may be the deepest lesson of human evolution. Progress is not only the story of stronger tools, faster machines, or greater intelligence. It is the story of an expanding sense of who deserves our care. Once, that circle held only a few people beside a fire. Today, it can hold a neighborhood, a nation, or an entire world. The dangers have changed. We no longer fear wolves beyond the shelter, but many people still face hunger, loneliness, displacement, and the terror of being unseen. We have more power than any generation before us, yet power means little if we forget the instinct that carried humanity this far, to keep one another alive. Every act of kindness continues an ancient tradition. Every shared meal echoes the first food divided around a fire. Every child protected, every stranger welcomed, every wounded person helped back to their feet becomes another step in the long human journey. We did not evolve only to survive the darkness. We evolved to become light for one another. And as long as we remember that, the fire our ancestors carried through 40,000 years of history will never go out.